Welcome back to another weekly review. We're looking at the trading week of August 25th, 2025. This is the last week of August, which is crazy. Summer has flown. I don't know where the time has gone. It's been an eventful summer, and it's been an uneventful summer in some ways too, because the market largely has been range-bound for pretty extended periods. But I've had some volatility sprinkled in here, which is always fun for a day trader. So interesting to see us going into September. Typically, volume is going to pick up in September, probably a little bit more volatility. And when I say volatility, I don't necessarily mean downside vol. Vol picking up can be upside or downside, doesn't really matter. It's just going to be more volume, more participants entering the market as people get back on desk from vacations and start to trade again. So hopefully in the next few weeks, we'll see some decent moves, some decent bigger rotations. We've had some pretty violent moves, but a lot of them have been, fairly news heavy, tweet heavy or news heavy. Obviously last week's a pretty good example. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting. Decent quarter so far for me. Definitely some big missed opportunities that I've left a lot of money on the table on some of these. Have had some decent losses as well. Overall, green quarter so far, but a lot of learning from me this past quarter. Difficult conditions overall. I don't care what anybody says. It's for me, it's been tough. So speaking individually, this last quarter has not been easy. It's been challenging for sure for primarily a directional futures trader with individual equity names. I've also traded as well, but yeah, tricky one. But getting into this week for the last trading week of August, we'll start with data. Don't have a ton, which is good. Monday, 10 a.m., we have home sales, 3:15. We have Logan speaking. Tuesday, we have durable goods at 8:30, as well as the Richmond Manufacturing Index, probably nothing burgers on both of those. Wednesday, we have crude inventories, which will be important if you're trading crude, as well as Barkin speaking at 11:45. Thursday, we have GDP, preliminary GDP, and jobless claims at 8:30, which is important. And then we have pending home sales at 10 and Waller speaking at 6. Friday, we have PCE at 8:30 a.m., 9:45 we have PMI, and then 10 a.m. we have consumer sentiment and one-year inflation expectations. So nothing crazy. We do have some earnings this week to pay attention to. I think the big one obviously will be Wednesday after hours. We have NVIDIA. We also have Snow and CrowdStrike if you care about those sectors. But obviously NVIDIA will be fairly impactful on this market. So just keep that in mind. Wednesday after close, we have that. That's the only one I'm really concerned with. Affirm will be interesting to see how they guide just with rates and whatnot and what's going on that side of the business. But big thing, Wednesday, NVIDIA. So paying attention to that. Last week was kind of nuts. So I don't know if I talked about this in previous videos or if I even showed this, but we fired blues. So one of the proprietary things that I've put together, I won't go into detail on the specifics of how this is calculated, but we fired blues, and when we fire blues, it means that we are close to extremes of range. And what happens when blues fire and backtesting in a live environment, as you can obviously see, is two things. It's stagnation and then it's vol. So what we got right away was stagnation. So we had balance form. We had a just very distributed market up here until Wednesday, or I guess until Tuesday, I should say. And then we had some volatility come in, and we had a pretty fast liquidation move over a 2-day period down into the 6360s range. And then obviously we had an inside day Thursday, and we had the Powell speech, Jackson Hole speech on Friday, which yeeted the market back up into almost all-time highs. So the big question is obviously, where do we go from here? And I'll be the first person to say that as far as higher time frames, we had the highest weekly close, or a new all-time high close on the weekly basis. And in theory, we should be taking out this prior all-time high that we set in the extended trading hours, or the electronic trading hours session. I'm a little surprised we didn't actually do this on Friday. I'm surprised and I'm not surprised. So one thing about Friday's session, and I think some people might have got burned on this, is that when we have an initial balance range that's extremely wide like this, So this is just a general rule, and I'm not going to throw stats at you or anything like that. But when we have an initial balance range that's extremely wide, especially driven by news, the stats on continuation for away from an IB this high are quite low. So usually what I'm going to look for when we set an IB like this, whether it's a news driver, it's usually going to be a news driver, but whether it's a news driver or we just have, a mega open drive into, B period continuation, the odds of this actually reaching further outside a 25% extension from IB are low. And the other thing to consider here too is on a weekly basis, I think some people might have been looking for, straight shot back up into 6509s, into prior all-time highs on Friday, and maybe they got burned, or maybe you grabbed a decent long from here. I'm not sure. I don't know how anybody else traded other than myself, but the one thing to also pay attention to is how weeklies are going to close. So I wasn't particularly bullish up into this distribution on Friday once it started to form, and there's two reasons. Part of that was order flow based, and as well as indicator based on NASDAQ, which I can talk a little bit about. But the other thing to consider here too is that we had a fairly large weekly range get put in, and we had almost a full traverse of said weekly range into a Friday, into 2 deviations away from weekly mean. So generally what we're going to see is weekly closes inside 2 deviations away from average. It's uncommon to close a week outside of 2 weeks. Uncommon to close a day, let alone a week, outside of 2 deviations away from mean. So looking at all this, all things considered, Friday to me was, once we basically set these highs, I had some other reasons, not to look for continuation on Friday, but I was mainly looking for us to basically form a balance range up here. And I missed this move up because it was a directional move I just wasn't positioned for on a futures basis, but I was able to catch some points on the NASDAQ, actually on the short side, up into the highs for a decent rotation down. So that's just a little insight into at least what I saw on Friday and why I wasn't necessarily mega bullish up into the highs on a weekly close basis. I figured we could potentially punch out that all-time high on Friday, but as far as closing outside of +2 on the weekly, I didn't think it was likely. And I mentioned that too on Twitter. I don't know if you follow me there, but go ahead and do that if you want. So interesting things. Immediate pivots for me will be the open B period singles that we have. So we have a huge set of B period single prints here. So we have poor structure on this short squeeze up. That's largely what this was. It was massive cover rallies, as well as some new buyers entering the fold. But the big thing here is that we have a giant period, B period, that's open singles separating a double distribution profile on the weekly. So what this basically means is that buyers want to maintain this 72 to 64 range. They want to maintain holding this squeeze up. They want to maintain last week's POC, so the highest traded price based on volume. They want to maintain last week's open. This range will be key for me. So if we're seeing early stabs down into this 72 to 64 range that are getting bid with decent lows, then I'll look for those long rotations back up to eventually take out the 6508 mark. If we're starting to see, kind of a weak lows get put in here, no real interest from initiative new buyers to keep us above this range, then what I'll be looking for is the backfill of B period down into 6430s, and to me 6430 to 6420 down in this range will be key for buyers to hold. Buyers will not want to see higher time frame closes below this range that we squeezed out of. That would be weakness in my opinion. So if we see some higher time frames start to close back below, give this all back, start to close back below, then I think the odds of this just being a pure short squeeze up and continuation lower are quite high. That's how I'd look at it. So I really have I generally don't have bias going into weeks, but I really don't have much bias here, because the big thing will be, whether or not we see acceptance above. We basically see acceptance of last Friday's value, hold this range from 74 to 65s, and then see if we have rotations back up. If we have acceptance over Friday's high, so let's say, Sunday Globex, we kind of fuck around a little bit inside this value, and then we have bids above 96s, and we see, an open drive continuation in the RTH session come Monday. We see continued acceptance above Friday's high. Then it'll be a long trade for me to get up into the ETH high at 65.08s to clean this up at least, and then look to see if we have continuation trades to 65.20s all the way up into 65.60s. And I've said this in the past as well in prior videos. I'm absolutely open to looking for potential fades up into this range, especially if I see blues start to form up here. And if that does happen, if I do see some things firing up here, which tell me to be cautious, or at least taper my expectations on potential continuation on the upside, I'll make that public as well on Twitter. So I'll just post that if I start to see it happen. So that's going to be it for ES. We've carved out a very large trading range. So my priority really from a day trading perspective will be, trusting some of the signals that I built over time to see if I can find anything that's going to give me, a decent rotation. But the big thing I'm going to focus on with ES is how, if there's acceptance basically in Friday's value in the upper distribution of last week's value, which would indicate obviously strength in the short term, basically no acceptance below 64s, and that would put me very likely on the long side to get those continuation trades back up and hopefully get some long trades up into 65.60s. So NASDAQ is going to be basically the same for me. NASDAQ is still lagging quite a bit on a relative basis compared to ES. So again, I had the same thing happen the week prior. I had blues fire up into the highs, stagnation, liquidation. So the big thing I'm going to be paying attention to is the same. I'm going to be looking at the 530 to 500 levels in the open B singles, and then the list for buyers again for me will be backfilling those B singles into 350s. And I don't want to see, if I'm a buyer and I'm looking for long trades, I don't want to see higher time frame acceptance below 350s. And again, to me, that would indicate that this short squeeze up was just that. It was a short squeeze, and if we see acceptance back below, then the continuation moves down are likely, in my opinion at least. Again, if we see decent lows start to form into the 530 to 500 range, so again, accepting Friday's value, no real giving back this squeeze, then it's going to be longs looking for those decent lows to get up into last week's POC, which is up here at 770s, and eventually up into the weekly POC from the week prior, which is actually naked on a weekly test basis, up into the 23,900s range and potentially up into the 24 range, into new all-time highs. So I think simplest way to look at this week is how are we trading around Friday's value? So did we have enough time and volume up here? Did we have enough not structure, because we really don't have structure below this, but do we have enough initiative buying after the risk of Powell is out of the way? Do we have continued buying and initiative buying up here to say that this is a reliable move and we can use this range to get us higher? That's the big thing. That's the big question, obviously. These short squeeze profiles, liquidation profile, so B profile with a long liquidation or a P profile with a short liquidation, can very often give these moves back. And again, that's largely going to be because these moves are violent cover rallies that a lot of the time can backfill. So again, I think the big thing for buyers is we don't want to see acceptance if you were a buyer, you don't want to see acceptance below the 64.30 range, because that would indicate to me that this was just a cover rally and continuation selling is likely. If we see this given back, again, if we start to offer down below 64s, I'll look for that backfill trade to get into 30s, and then we'll see here if there's continuation selling below, and if the market is still in I'll say a weaker spot. Obviously, this market isn't weak. We closed the weekly at all-time highs, but short-term weakness or potentially just a lack of willingness to buy it up here at this time. So that's how I'm going to look at this week. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't have too much more. I don't really want to go into CL again this week. I did last week. Nothing has really changed. It's basically a range. The big thing just watching on CL is 64s. I don't think there's really much more to it as far as where I'm positioned. I've been saying this for the last few weeks, though. I've been looking for, you know, those larger long rotations from down here into the 61, 62 range, and we've gotten some really nice moves intraday. I would be cautious trying to be long up into 64s on CL if we see a decent offer. And if I have some things fire off, I'll probably look for intraday shorts. But as far as larger positioning, I do have some longs from commons, from UCO, from down here. And hopefully we can get some continuation further up higher with that. So we'll have to see. Hopefully that helps. If any of this helps, please leave a like in the video. Please comment. If you have any questions, subscribe to the channel if you haven't. I appreciate your time. Thank you.